You remember the scene in Dodgeball when Rip Torn is throwing wrenches at Mac Guy and he's like, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And he proceeds to hit him with a lot of wrenches. And it's very funny, but it's not funny when it happens to you. And I know this because it happened to me, except without wrenches. I was in 5th grade. I signed up for a baseball camp. I've been a shortstop for a long time, but now I wanted to learn how to be a catcher. So they divide us up into our little position groups and they introduce us all to our position coach. And we get this guy who I don't think understood that he was working with 5th graders. He was the most intense person I've ever worked with in any situation ever in my entire life. He was all bow-legged and beat up from all those years behind the plate. And he comes out and he starts pointing at us, but he's missing half of his finger. He would later explain that was from some kind of freak catching accident at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. Go Lopers. And so he starts off with this whole speech about, catcher's the backbone of the baseball squad. You got to have integrity and toughness and guts. You can't be out there chasing after the women like the outfielders. You let them preen out there and do what they... And we're like, I don't even understand these issues. I'm not familiar with these controversies, sir, I'm afraid. And he's like, I'll tell you now, rule number 1 for a catcher is this. You can't be afraid of the ball. Now, which one of you little pukes is afraid of the ball? The correct answer to this question, should you ever find yourself in such a situation, is to stare forward with your hands at your side and wait for him to call on someone else. The incorrect answer is to allow the internal monologue of your Sunday school brain to kick in and be like, well, the risen Lord says to tell the truth, and I'm afraid of baseballs. I am, sir. I'm afraid of baseballs. Well, you bring yourself up and get against that backstop. Like, so I go up there and I'm against the backstop and he gets this 5-gallon bucket. He's like, here's what I'm going to throw these at you. You don't let one of these things hit the backstop. I'm like, I have questions. Do I get a glove or how do I do it? But you just don't let these hit the... And he starts whipping these tennis balls at me. And I mean, not nicely. He was firing these tennis balls at me from like me to you right here, just bouncing them at me, hitting me in the chest. And like at first you just, obviously you cover the midsection and then eventually he's like, get your hands away from there. Every one of you is wearing a cup. Well, yes, you're right. I am. And so stuff's just bouncing off me and it really hurt and it was embarrassing and people are laughing at me. And eventually though, like this thing in your brain starts to click like, okay, this doesn't work and this doesn't work. But this kind of does. And I'm serious. In a few minutes of him doing this to me, along with a bunch of bruises, I also gained the intuitive knowledge for how to slide to a ball and block it to keep it from getting past me. I've never forgotten that skill. It was great. And by the end of the week, he's pegging us with baseballs like that. And it didn't feel good. But that ordeal got me to a point where I really did develop a skill. What's weird is that super angry wrench tennis ball missing finger guy actually had my best interests at heart. It was just a very difficult process to get me to where I needed to be. That analogy breaks down a tiny bit here, but if you get that, I think you can get what happens in Luke chapter 4. We have a situation here where Jesus has gone through his whole birth and upbringing preamble that explains how important he is. And then we get to the place where he goes out into the wilderness and gets baptized. And like literally the whole Trinity shows up for the party. And God's like, that guy's awesome. It's my son. Do what he says. And so Jesus is affirmed. And you've got this genealogy affirming how important Jesus is. And the very next thing that happens is here in chapter 4, he goes out into this wilderness for 40 days to be tempted. Now, a lot of us know this story, but one of the things that we might forget is that that was God's idea. He was not led out into the desert by Satan or Lucifer or his political enemies. He was led out there by the Spirit. In other words, in this broken, deeply damaged analogy that probably only exists because I wanted to do that guy's voice, the angry, assertive drill sergeant character type put someone through difficult paces to get them ready for the challenges that were ahead. Likewise here, it seems like God is putting Jesus through the paces to prepare him for the challenges that are ahead. I actually think that kind of worked. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Go ahead and read Luke 4, 1 through 13, and we'll get after it. passage opens with Jesus returning from the Jordan, which means we can kind of triangulate where this whole episode must have taken place. If he's coming out of the Jordan River and he's returning to presumably home or where he operated most of the time, it means we're on the west side, let me see for you, west side of the Jordan River. And some people think he got baptized up north by the Sea of Galilee, but that's not wilderness area up there. It's kind of nice. It'd be a hard place to starve. The description we get here fits a lot better with a southern Jordan River baptism location, which would take Jesus up into like awful South Dakota Badlands where there's just nothing. A brutal chunk of land for a person to try to live for 40 days. That's more the kind of place you want to go for an ordeal. So I like that southern location. The historical tradition backs me up on this. There's a Greek Orthodox monastery pinned into a mountain down by Jericho that they call the Mount of Temptation. Sometimes you'll hear that called the Mount of Quaranta. I think that's right, which is interesting because it's derived from 16th or 17th century Italian word that means 40 or 40 days, which then evolves into the English word quarantine. So what that means is our word quarantine is directly descended from these 40 days that Jesus spent in the wilderness. Crazy. At any rate, theologically, once again, God, not Satan or chance, leads Jesus out into this wilderness. And in doing so, got to take care of that itch. Whew, that was getting me. In doing so, what happens is that a few theological points about Jesus' relationship with the Father and who Jesus is are illustrated. One, Jesus is super dependent on his Father and really, really likes him. That is a theme that is hyper pronounced throughout the Gospels. Number one favorite thing that Jesus liked to talk about was not politics or dirty sex or swears or the beers. It's his relationship with his Father. So we see that established right here in Jesus' maybe most desperate or second most desperate moment. Second, the theme of the Word of God being that which Jesus affirms and also takes refuge in when dealing with difficult stuff comes through. Third, we see illustrated Jesus' absolute commitment to this plan. He knew where this whole thing was headed. The whole you take on flesh and become a person and then go die plan was his plan. And even though he's given 3 off-ramps to this by the devil, we're going to see him resist those, and that demonstrates just how in he is on this whole let's go redeem things idea. The first temptation starts with Jesus already vulnerable and worn down. He's hungry, he's thirsty, and who should show up but literally the devil. Now look, in the modern age of internet memes and criticism, when we say literally Satan, we always mean figuratively Satan. But this means literally Satan. The devil arrives in person with a personality and an agenda, and he's clever and he's got some suggestions. This is held out as a real interaction. Now, I completely get how there could be skepticism about the existence of a literal, actual devil, and certainly the way our notions of the devil have played out throughout history are more informed by the medieval poet, author, satirist Dante than they are by anything in the Bible, like your pitchforks and your horns and all of that stuff. It's just bonus material. But the idea that there is a created being, a fallen angel of God, uniquely appointed with tremendous power, whose ego got the best of him, is one that is woven throughout the entire narrative of Scripture. It doesn't seem to be metaphorical, and there are multiple passages that describe the characteristics of Satan, Lucifer, the devil, whatever you want to call him, as being a real being with a real agenda who is actively trying to thwart the plans of God. So he shows up here, and the astute reader will realize, this is a big deal. Everything is in play here. Satan is pushing all his chips to the middle of the table. If I can step into history right here and cut off this Jesus thing before it gets traction, I win. God's plan is thwarted and it's wrecked. So he starts by striking at Jesus in an incredibly vulnerable place. Now think about this. Jesus has been God forever, according to the Bible. It predates creation and existence. He's unlimited in every way. He's never known need. And even in his brief time as taking on human flesh, he's never known need like this. He's never felt this kind of hunger or desperation. Jesus has never been in a weaker place where he is more in touch with the human condition, temptation, and human vulnerability. And rather than Satan shooting the moon, which he does later, he just starts with, you want a bite to eat? Now look, eating is fine. Eating is good. But in this situation, Jesus was here to uniquely focus on the task that was before him. Satan's coming to mess with it. And he says something really interesting. If you're the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. What an interesting way to set that up. So he frames it as, if this thing that we both know is true, do this. If you're my friend, you'll do this thing for me. We know this technique is manipulative and dirty, but sadly, it's often very effective. Well, why wouldn't Jesus want to affirm that he is indeed the Son of God? I am too. How dare you doubt me? You were there when we made you. I'll show you, remind you, Son of God is, jerk. Nope. Jesus instead says, it is written, man does not live on bread alone. You can read between the lines there and understand that his answer is, no, I'm not going to do that. A couple of quick side notes. One, the book of James makes it really clear that temptation isn't from God. And we can reason through what we see in the rest of the Bible to even figure out that not all temptation is even from Satan. I suppose it could come from ourselves or just from living in a fallen, busted up world. Who knows? There are probably lots of theories on what to do with the idea of temptation. But certainly we can't say here, God is tempting Jesus. God initiated a test or an ordeal, something to demonstrate Jesus' commitment to what this plan is, but the temptation is from the devil. We'll probably get into more of that later. Second thing, and this is really, really important to understanding what we're talking about in this passage. Do you remember that We Are the World song that all the 80s singers got together and performed back in the day? Like every single one of them, we could like their one phrase where they'd step up to the mic and they would go even harder than the last person. And there's one line in there where Willie Nelson gets his turn and he steps up to the mic and it's something like, just as God turns stones to bread. I think that might have been like Tom Petty and Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson. I don't know. The song lyric has Jesus doing it. Has Jesus actually turning the stones to bread. I don't know if there's some kind of satanic evil agenda that we need to go and protest the next USA for Africa concert. But I just thought it was really curious that they went out of their way to put that line in there and that it's not an accurate reflection. I don't know what that means, but I'm having fun. The last two temptations play out a lot like the first one. Temptation number 2 has Satan taking Jesus up to a high place and being like, look at all of this land. If we combine our powers, we could rule it all together. Just bow down and worship me. It's kind of like the Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, rule the galaxy together appeal. And Jesus is not going to worship Satan. And so instead he says, it's written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So then the devil is going to take another shot at this, takes Jesus to the middle of the city of Jerusalem on the highest point of the temple and points all of this out. It's like, hey, just chuck yourself off of this building. If you're the Son of God, God should protect you. It should go to plan. I think implicitly what he's driving at here is creating a scene in which Jesus wouldn't have to do the whole cross thing in order to play his redemptive role and be acknowledged as Messiah. He could just throw himself off of there and have superpowers and fly, and everybody would be like, what? That is the most public, obvious miracle ever. It didn't really mean anything, but it was rad. You're the man. And then Jesus would be, I guess, celebrated and exalted and embraced, which is really not why he was there. And so the temptation here is to change the plan and to avoid the hard parts of the plan that this whole testing in the wilderness thing is meant to point him toward. Jesus is super smart. It's like he thought of words and ideas and everything. And he answered, it says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Jesus passes all three of these temptation moments in the face of, frankly, the best tempter ever. Satan is very, very effective at this. And it says, when the devil had finished all this tempting, he left him until an opportune time. Real quick, I just want to say, props to you, Satan, because this is a smart foul. You know what I'm talking about, right? You got a breakaway, you're playing defense and basketball. A guy's going to score either way. So why not foul him and just make him earn those 2 points from the line instead of making it an easy layup and just letting him go by? It's effectively what Satan's doing here. Like, he could have just let this testing happen and see if Jesus could deliver at the cross and follow through on what he's supposed to do. But instead, he shows up and makes a big play right here. Make Jesus earn it. See if he can hit those shots at the line. And what we're going to see as the rest of Luke unfolds is that Jesus is capable of hitting those shots from the line. Like Jesus, every person faces temptation. But when we picture temptation, I think we've been coached to picture like naughtiness, being tempted to indulge a little bit too much, being tempted to go and tell a fib or do something we shouldn't do. And those are legit temptations. I mean, don't get me wrong, we could be tempted to do really destructive stuff with catastrophic consequences. But really nothing here that Jesus dealt with was a temptation toward naughtiness. It was a temptation toward entirely missing the point of his existence. This was a temptation to reject the authority of God, reject Jesus' relationship with the Father, and instead appoint himself unnaturally and independently king of everything instead of accepting the role of authority that the Father gave him. Well, now that's a temptation that we can relate to, but I think that's a temptation that unfolds more slowly. Very rarely do we have a moment in the process of belief where we're like, right now in this moment, I'm tempted to just declare total independence from God because I just want to. It's more erosive than that. It's a long-term process that's built of a whole bunch of different things, whereas Jesus was confronted with it in the moment, in more like a business negotiation type of instant. But here's the deal, and this is the second thing. What Jesus did to resist that is also available to us. First, Jesus leans into his relationship with his Father, which we are able to do as well when facing the big-time serious temptation. Second, we see Jesus not get suckered into Christian-ish, pseudo-religious kind of uses of sort of the Bible to twist things around to make it about us. The most basic twisting of the Bible is just this. Instead of the Bible being the story of God that points to the authority of God and the reality of God, we just flip it around and change the way verses read to make it point to the glory of us and the importance of us and the drama of us, and somehow God fits into that thing. Jesus doesn't let Satan do that to the Bible, and in doing so, he resists this temptation. And I guess the third one that we see Jesus doing that we can also do is related to that. He just leans into the Bible accurately. He goes to specific truisms in the text that just point out that right relationship. God, king, me, not. In Jesus' situation, his role is, God in the flesh, so it's a little different. But for us, God, king, me, not. All of the things that Jesus leaned on in a moment far more desperate than probably any moment most of us will ever face are all available to us as well as we navigate the challenges of a life of faith. But the point of all of this is that if you want to get good at life, hire someone with a missing finger and bow legs to throw baseballs at your chest until you bleed. You'll learn things. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. We'll see you soon.